The hum of the fluorescent lights in Sterling Corp's archives was less a sound and more a low-grade existential threat. It buzzed with the sterile, suffocating drone of a million forgotten memos, a billion discarded contracts, and the spectral whispers of 1,000 HR violations that never quite made it to paper. For Agnes Periwinkle, it was the soundtrack to her life. 22 years. 22 years of breathing in recycled air that smelled vaguely of despair and stale coffee, of meticulously cataloging the detritus of corporate ambition. Her official title? Senior Archivist. Her unofficial title? The silent guardian of Sterling Corp's collective amnesia. She was the digital equivalent of a forgotten corner in a dusty library, the one place nobody ever thought to look, but where all the really important, damning stuff ended up. Think of her as a librarian for the damned. While executives like Veronica Sterling were busy practicing their power poses in front of full-length mirrors, Agnes was the one ensuring that the original purchase order for that ridiculous yacht was still accessible, just in case someone needed a reminder of where all that strategic investment actually went. Veronica Sterling. The name itself was practically a corporate buzzword generator. Synergy, disruption, lean management, stakeholder value. She spoke in tongues that sounded vaguely intelligent but meant absolutely nothing. Her suits cost more than Agnes's annual salary, and her smile was about as genuine as a $3 bill. She was the kind of executive who believed charisma was a substitute for competence, and that power meant shouting the loudest in a room full of people too afraid to disagree. Agnes knew her type. She'd seen them come and go, like particularly aggressive strains of office mold, always leaving a sticky residue of ego and poor decisions in their wake. This particular Monday, however, felt different. The air in the archives wasn't just stale. It was thick with an impending doom that Agnes could practically taste, like burnt toast in the break room. It was the kind of feeling you get right before the printer jams for the 1,000th time, but instead of paper, it was livelihoods. The intercom crackled, a sound Agnes usually associated with fire drills or mandatory team-building exercises that involved trust falls into lukewarm water. Agnes Periwinkle to Miss Sterling's office. Immediately. Immediately. The word hung in the air, sharp and unwelcome, like a comma in the middle of a sentence that should have ended with a period. Agnes sighed. The sound lost in the gentle whirring of the climate control system that kept the old paper from disintegrating faster than a budget proposal in a recession. She smoothed down her sensible beige cardigan, the one with the reinforced elbows that had seen more stapler jams than most people had seen good days. She wasn't one for drama. Her life was measured in decimal points and cross-referenced files, but even Agnes could sense when she was being summoned for something that smelled less like a performance review and more like an impending disaster. Veronica's office was an assault on the senses. It was all glass, steel, and abstract art that probably cost more than Agnes's entire apartment building. The view of the city skyline was, no doubt, meant to symbolize Veronica's ascent, her dominance. Agnes saw it as a giant, glittering reminder of how many people had to fall for her to get that high. Veronica was perched behind her enormous desk, looking like a predator who'd just cornered its prey. Her perfectly coiffed hair gleamed under the track lighting, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, zeroed in on Agnes. Next to her, looking utterly out of place, sat a man Agnes vaguely recognized from a company picnic photo. Some freelance journalist with a notebook and a predatory gleam in his eye, probably chasing a story. Sterling Corp was a veritable goldmine for those. Agnes, Veronica purred, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that Agnes had learned to translate as imminent corporate homicide. Thank you for coming. Have a seat. She gestured vaguely towards a plush, ridiculously uncomfortable-looking chair. Agnes sat, perching on the edge as if the chair might bite. She kept her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze steady but unobtrusive. She was an expert at being present without being perceived. It was a skill honed over 2 decades of watching people make terrible decisions. "This is Mr. Davies," Veronica said, gesturing to the reporter. "He's been doing some investigative work on the company. asking a lot of questions. Frankly, Agnes, he's become rather persistent. Agnes offered a small, non-committal nod. Persistent reporters were like rogue dust bunnies in the archives. Annoying, but usually manageable if you knew where to sweep. And? Veronica continued, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was amplified by the office's acoustics. He's getting close to some sensitive information. Information that could be damaging. Agnes remained silent, her expression unreadable. She knew exactly what Veronica meant by sensitive information. It was the kind of information that didn't make it into the glossy brochures or the investor relations meetings. It was the stuff that kept the lawyers on retainer and the compliance department perpetually on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Veronica's gaze sharpened, pinning Agnes like a specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Davies," Veronica continued, her eyes never leaving Agnes, "is on the verge of uncovering some undesirable aspects of our past operations. Things that, if made public, could significantly impact our reputation and, of course, our stock price. A significant downturn, in fact." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We can't have that." "So, Agnes," she leaned back, a glint of something predatory in her eyes, "I need you to handle this. Make it go away. Handle it." The phrase echoed in Agnes's mind. It was code. Code for what? Discredit the reporter? Smear his name? Fabricate evidence? Veronica's go-to move was always to deflect, to distract, to destroy. She operated on the principle that if you could make enough noise, people would forget what they were actually supposed to be listening to. "Handle it," Veronica repeated, her tone now laced with an impatient edge. "Find whatever he's looking for, and make sure it doesn't see the light of day. Or, better yet, find something that points him in the wrong direction. Something misleading. You're the archivist, Agnes. You're good at finding things people don't want found, aren't you?" Agnes's breath hitched. A barely perceptible intake of air. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of information retrieval, began to whir. She knew what Veronica wanted. She wanted Agnes to find something, anything, to discredit the reporter, to bury the truth, or perhaps even to fabricate something that would paint Sterling Corp in a less illuminating light. "Mr. Davies," Veronica continued, her eyes never leaving Agnes, "is on the verge of uncovering some undesirable aspects of our past operations. Things that, if made public, could significantly impact our reputation and, of course, our stock price. A significant downturn, in fact." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We can't have that." "So, Agnes," she leaned back, a glint of something predatory in her eyes, "I need you to handle this. Make it go away. Handle it." The phrase echoed in Agnes's mind. It was code. Code for what? Discredit the reporter? Smear his name? Fabricate evidence? Veronica's go-to move was always to deflect, to distract, to destroy. She operated on the principle that if you could make enough noise, people would forget what they were actually supposed to be listening to. "Handle it," Veronica repeated, her tone now laced with an impatient edge. "Find whatever he's looking for, and make sure it doesn't see the light of day. Or, better yet, find something that points him in the wrong direction. Something misleading. You're the archivist, Agnes. You're good at finding things people don't want found, aren't you?" Agnes's breath hitched. A barely perceptible intake of air. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of information retrieval, began to whir. She knew what Veronica wanted. She wanted Agnes to find something, anything, to discredit the reporter, to bury the truth, or perhaps even to fabricate something that would paint Sterling Corp in a less illuminating light. "Mr. Davies," Veronica continued, her eyes never leaving Agnes, "is on the verge of uncovering some undesirable aspects of our past operations. Things that, if made public, could significantly impact our reputation and, of course, our stock price. A significant downturn, in fact." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We can't have that." So, Agnes. She leaned back, a glint of something predatory in her eyes. I need you to handle this. Make it go away. Handle it. The phrase echoed in Agnes's mind. It was code. Code for what? Discredit the reporter? Smear his name? Fabricate evidence? Veronica's go-to move was always to deflect, to distract, to destroy. She operated on the principle that if you could make enough noise, people would forget what they were actually supposed to be listening to. Handle it, Veronica repeated, her tone now laced with an impatient edge. Find whatever he's looking for, and make sure it doesn't see the light of day. Or, better yet, find something that points him in the wrong direction. Something misleading. You're the archivist, Agnes. You're good at finding things people don't want found, aren't you? Agnes's breath hitched, a barely perceptible intake of air. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of information retrieval, began to whir. She knew what Veronica wanted. She wanted Agnes to find something, anything, to discredit the reporter, to bury the truth, or perhaps even to fabricate something that would paint Sterling Corp in a less illuminating light. Agnes finally spoke, her voice quiet, almost too quiet for the cavernous office. Miss Sterling, I am responsible for the accurate and secure preservation of company records. My mandate is to ensure the integrity of the archive, not to manipulate it. Veronica let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Oh, Agnes, don't be so dramatic. It's not about manipulation. It's about strategic information management. Think of it as damage control. A small leak is better than a tidal wave, wouldn't you agree? She gestured towards Mr. Davies. He's looking for a smoking gun, Agnes. And you, my dear, are the only one who knows where all the bullets are hidden. Mr. Davies offered a tight, professional smile, his pen poised over his notebook. I'm just trying to get the facts, Miss Periwinkle. Transparency is key, wouldn't you say? Agnes met his gaze, her own eyes calm and steady. I believe in verifiable facts, Mr. Davies, the kind that can withstand scrutiny. Veronica waved a dismissive hand, her patience clearly wearing thin. Agnes, this isn't a philosophical debate. This is about protecting Sterling Corp, and by extension, all of us. We've been very generous with your tenure here. Now it's time for you to return the favor. Find it and make it go away. Or find something to make him go away. Understood? Agnes felt a familiar sensation bloom in her chest. The cold, hard certainty that came from knowing she possessed something invaluable. Something the arrogant fools around her had consistently overlooked. It wasn't the yacht, or the offshore accounts, or the inflated expense reports that were Sterling Corp's biggest vulnerability. It was something far more mundane, something buried deep within the labyrinthine digital filing system that Agnes, and only Agnes, truly understood. It was the digital equivalent of a perfectly preserved, slightly dusty, but utterly damning paper trail. She thought of the Project Nightingale file. A project so poorly documented, so off the books, it barely registered as a blip on most internal audits. It was a pet project of Veronica's from years ago, a blatant violation of several environmental regulations, disguised as a waste reduction initiative. Agnes had flagged it, of course, back when it was just a few lines of code and some whispered conversations. She'd saved every snippet, every stray email, every hidden log file, not out of malice, but because that's what she did. She archived, she preserved, she kept the truth, even when no one else cared to look for it. It was her job, and she was exceptionally good at it. Agnes stood, her movements slow and deliberate. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The hum of the archives suddenly sounded less like a threat and more like a lullaby. I understand, Miss Sterling, she said, her voice steady. I will look into it. Veronica waved her away, already turning her attention back to Davies. Excellent. Now, if you'll excuse us, Agnes has tasks to attend to. Agnes walked out of the office, the opulent sterility of Veronica's domain receding behind her. The city lights outside seemed less like symbols of power and more like flickering embers of ambition, waiting to be extinguished. She didn't feel fear. She didn't feel anger. She felt the quiet, potent thrill of a librarian who had just been handed the Dewey Decimal Code to a hidden vault. Veronica Sterling had told her to handle a reporter. Agnes had a far more elegant, far more satisfying plan. She wasn't going to make it go away. She was going to make it blow up. And she knew exactly the document that would ignite the fuse. It was a single, overlooked, perfectly preserved file. A document that proved Veronica Sterling's corruption in black and white. And Agnes was going to make sure the entire world saw it. Her work was about to get very interesting. The archives beckoned, not as a place of quiet stagnation, but as a tactical command center. The hum of the servers was no longer a threat. It was a promise of reckoning. Agnes was going to deliver the facts. And the facts, as always, would be devastating. The reporter was sniffing around for dirt. Agnes would give him a whole excavation site. Veronica wanted her to make it go away. Agnes was about to make it all come out. It was time for the archivist to become the architect of a very public downfall. And it all started with one, perfectly placed, anonymous email. The kind that lands with the soft thud of truth, but resonates like a bomb. The archives hummed their low, ceaseless dirge. For Agnes Periwinkle, it was a familiar song, a symphony of the overlooked and the forgotten. But today, the hum felt different. It was charged with anticipation, a subtle vibration that spoke of impending seismic shifts. Veronica Sterling's command to handle the reporter had been a catalyst, not a request for brute force, but an accidental ignition of a meticulously prepared inferno. Agnes hadn't gone to find dirt. She had gone to find the blueprint. Her office wasn't an office at all, but a meticulously organized digital fortress. The file for Project Nightingale wasn't just a document. It was a digital iceberg with only a tiny, easily dismissed tip visible on the surface of Sterling Corp's over-sanitized internal network. Agnes had spent years of late nights, of pretending to be offline while actually mapping every digital shadow, every access log anomaly, every deleted email that had, against all odds, left a ghost in the system. Her computer screen glowed, a portal into the company's digital soul. It was a landscape of code, contracts, and communication logs, all meticulously tagged and cross-referenced. She wasn't just an archivist. She was an intelligence operative. Her weapons, the metadata, her battlefield, the server room. She'd created phantom backups, encrypted caches hidden in plain sight, disguised as benign system updates or forgotten software licenses. Project Nightingale's true nature, its blatant disregard for environmental laws, the falsified safety reports, the payoffs to local officials, was all there, laid bare in irrefutable digital footprints. The reporter, Mr. Davies, was her unwitting instrument. Agnes had sent him her package, anonymously, of course. A single, encrypted file, delivered via a burner email address and a public Wi-Fi network from 3 towns over. It wasn't a plea for justice. It was a data dump. She'd included just enough context, project code names, key dates, and the names of the officials involved, to point Davies in the right direction, without revealing her own hand. Her instructions to herself were simple: prepare, observe, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. Within 48 hours, the first tremors began. It started subtly, a cryptic message from Dan, the facilities manager, a good soul who still wore the same stained Sterling Corp polo shirt he'd had for a decade. Hey, Agnes. Weird thing. The external servers for the Waste Reduction Initiative are showing massive anomalies, like they're actively trying to delete themselves. It is stumped. Thought you might know something about old system quirks? Agnes's fingers flew across the keyboard. System quirks was putting it mildly. Veronica, in her haste to bury Nightingale, had implemented a shoddy, ad hoc deletion protocol. Agnes had merely amplified it. She hadn't deleted anything herself. No, that would be too crude, too traceable. She'd merely nudged the system's own self-cleaning functions into overdrive, feeding them corrupted parameters. Then came the internal panic, a faint buzz in the office grapevine that Agnes could sense even from her quiet corner of the archives. Old colleagues, those who still dared to communicate outside of official channels, sent hushed texts. Agnes, have you seen the news about Sterling Corp? Some journalist is digging into old projects. Rumor is, it's bad. Heard, Veronica is furious. Apparently, someone leaked something big. Anyone hear anything? The panic escalated. Agnes saw it in the frantic all-staff emails that started popping up, laced with forced optimism and corporate speak. Team, we are aware of external inquiries regarding historical operational data. Sterling Corp remains committed to transparency and sustainable practices. We are cooperating fully with all relevant parties. The message was clear. There's a fire, but we're pretending it's just a mild draft. Agnes knew better. The relevant parties weren't just cooperating, they were likely launching their own investigations. Veronica's damage control was proving to be more like a forensic audit trigger. Davies's article, when it finally dropped on a Tuesday morning, was a meticulously researched piece that didn't just accuse. It provided evidence. It detailed the falsified emissions reports, the undisclosed hazardous waste disposal, and the suspicious timing of certain permits being granted. It named names, including Veronica Sterling's, not just as CEO, but as a direct signatory on key falsification documents. The office went into lockdown. Meetings were canceled, replaced by hushed, urgent huddles behind closed doors. Agnes, in her quiet haven, could almost feel the vibrations of the executive floor as the carefully constructed facade of Sterling Corp began to crack. She saw the ripple effect. A key investor pulled out, citing due diligence concerns. A major client, citing ethical concerns, put a crucial contract on hold. The stock ticker, once a proud, upward-sloping line, began to resemble a dying heartbeat. Veronica, Agnes imagined, was likely having one of her famous tantrums, her expensive silk scarf probably twisted into a knot of pure rage. She'd wanted Agnes to handle the reporter. Agnes had handled it by providing the reporter with the perfect weapon. The true panic, however, set in when the regulatory bodies, alerted by Davies's exposé, began their own official investigations. Suddenly, Sterling Corp wasn't just facing a bad press cycle. They were facing fines, sanctions, and potentially legal proceedings. Agnes watched as internal IT security logs, which she'd carefully monitored for years, began to light up like a Christmas tree. Access attempts to the Nightingale archives were being blocked, not by Agnes, but by Sterling Corp's own automated security protocols. The system, sensing an unprecedented breach, was going into lockdown. But they couldn't lock down what they didn't understand. Agnes hadn't just sent the evidence, she had strategically planted digital breadcrumbs that led directly to the source of the problem, Veronica's personal management of the project. She'd subtly highlighted the discrepancies in Veronica's own digital signature timestamps and the dates of falsified reports, creating a narrative that pointed not to a rogue employee, but to a deliberate executive decision. Agnes received another text, this time from Dan, his usual jovial tone replaced by genuine fear. Agnes, what the hell is going on? It says the Nightingale project files are flagged for immediate regulatory seizure. Security's locked down access for everyone. Even the execs can't get in. They're saying something about executive directive overrides. I've never seen anything like it. Executive directive overrides. Agnes smiled faintly. That was her signature touch. She had foreseen this possibility. When Veronica demanded she handle things, Agnes had done precisely that. She'd ensured that the Nightingale files, while containing Veronica's directives, were also protected by a failsafe she'd personally embedded, a legal encryption layer that could only be decrypted by an authorized external entity, like a governmental regulatory body. It was a digital booby trap, set to spring when unauthorized access was attempted, or worse, when the files were officially requested. Veronica had wanted to bury it. Agnes had ensured it would be exhumed. The panic wasn't just a buzz anymore, it was a full-blown siren. The executives were scrambling, their buzzwords failing them now. Synergy couldn't fix regulatory fines. Disruption couldn't mend a shattered public image. Agnes could practically feel the heat radiating from the executive floor, the scent of burning ambition and roasted egos. They finally understood they were in deep trouble, and they likely suspected Agnes had a hand in it. But the true depth of her leverage remained hidden, buried beneath layers of digital obscurity and corporate incompetence. The trap was sprung, and Sterling Corp was caught, writhing in the snare. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, precisely at 4:17 p.m., a time Agnes usually reserved for brewing her second pot of chamomile tea. The caller ID displayed a Sterling Corp exchange, followed by a frantic series of digits that she recognized as Veronica Sterling's direct line. Agnes let it ring, enjoying the digital echo of Veronica's impending desperation. She poured herself a fresh cup, the aroma of chamomile filling her small, uncluttered apartment, a stark contrast to the stale, anxious air that must be suffocating the Sterling Corp executive floor. She finally answered, her voice calm, even-toned. Agnes Periwinkle speaking. Silence. Then, a choked gasp, followed by a voice that sounded like it had been gargled with gravel. Agnes, thank God! You have to help us! It was Veronica. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, unadulterated panic. It was the sound of a queen stripped of her jewels, her crown askew, desperately clinging to a fraying thread. Help you with what, Miss Sterling? Agnes replied, taking a slow sip of her tea. Are you referring to the investigation? Investigation? Agnes, it's a catastrophe. Davies's article was just the tip of the iceberg. The EPA is involved, the SEC. Our stock has plummeted. Investors are calling, threatening lawsuits. We're facing crippling fines, possibly closure. Veronica's voice cracked. This Project Nightingale? It's worse than we thought. Far, far worse. And they're tracing it back, directly back, to your archives. Agnes allowed a small, private smile to grace her lips. My archives are meticulously maintained, Miss Sterling. They reflect the documented reality of Sterling Corp's operations. Documented reality? Veronica shrieked. Agnes, this is going to ruin us, ruin me. I told you to handle it, to make it go away. And I did handle it, Miss Sterling, Agnes said, her tone remaining level. I ensured the truth was properly archived. It appears it has now been retrieved. You asked me to handle a reporter. I provided him with the verifiable facts. You see, while you were busy creating buzzwords and crafting a corporate fantasy, I was busy documenting the reality. And it turns out, the reality of Project Nightingale is quite unpleasant. There was a strained silence on Veronica's end, punctuated by what sounded like frustrated grunts. Then, a new voice, clipped and authoritative, cut in. Miss Periwinkle, this is Marcus Thorne, General Counsel for Sterling Corp. Miss Sterling has authorized me to speak with you regarding this matter. We understand you may possess certain critical documentation related to Project Nightingale. We are prepared to offer a significant severance package, a substantial bonus, and full immunity from any repercussions, should you agree to cooperate and provide us with that documentation. We need to understand what has been disclosed and what we can do to mitigate the damage. Agnes chuckled softly. Immunity? Mr. Thorne, I haven't done anything that requires immunity. I've simply preserved records. As for cooperation, I'm always willing to discuss facts. She paused, letting the implication hang. However, the documentation you're looking for isn't something I can just hand over. It's already in the hands of the authorities, and it's quite damning. Veronica's voice, now hoarse, cut back in. What do you mean, already in the hands of the authorities? You sent it to Davies! Mr. Davies's article was merely the first domino, Miss Sterling, Agnes explained calmly. My archival process is thorough. Project Nightingale wasn't just poorly managed, it was riddled with procedural violations. I also noted the unauthorized disposal of certain hazardous materials, a fact I felt obligated to document with a full forensic audit trail. That audit trail, along with Veronica's own directive memos authorizing the falsification of safety reports, was anonymously forwarded to the EPA last week. Simultaneously, the SEC was alerted to the financial discrepancies and the subsequent cover-up, which included, shall we say, strategic payments to certain regulatory officials. The silence on the other end was deafening. It was the silence of minds grasping for air, of empires crumbling. Agnes could picture Veronica's face, a mask of disbelief and fury, Thorne's professional composure shattering like a dropped glass. You reported us? Thorne finally stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I preserved evidence of malfeasance, Mr. Thorne, Agnes corrected gently. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. You see, when Veronica Sterling asked me to handle the reporter, she inadvertently prompted me to ensure the full scope of Project Nightingale's transgressions was thoroughly and officially documented. My job is to ensure the integrity of the archive. And sometimes, the most important part of that integrity is ensuring the truth sees the light of day. Veronica let out a strangled cry. You sabotaged us! You traitor! I merely did my job, Miss Sterling, Agnes said, her voice devoid of emotion. You built your empire on a foundation of lies and exploitation. I merely provided the evidence that the foundation was unstable. Now, as for your request for cooperation, she continued, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more businesslike. I can present you with two options. Consider them. The final act of Project Nightingale. Agnes took another slow breath, savoring the power of this moment. The architect of Sterling Corp's downfall, standing in her quiet apartment, dictating terms to the wreckage of a corporate titan. Option A, Agnes began, is what I call the narrow escape hatch. You, Veronica Sterling, resign immediately, effective this evening. You issue a full public apology, taking sole responsibility for Project Nightingale and any associated legal ramifications. Sterling Corp issues a formal statement acknowledging the report and announcing a comprehensive internal review, spearheaded by an independent ethics committee, with myself as a consultant. You agree to a substantial financial settlement for past oversight and creative accounting. This would involve a significant payout to me and a complete cessation of all legal actions against me. It would also involve a discreet payout to the reporter, Mr. Davies, for his investigative efforts, as a goodwill gesture. This path minimizes the regulatory fallout and allows Sterling Corp to pivot, albeit with significant damage control and a new ethical leadership. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of a collapsing world. Veronica was likely hyperventilating. Thorne was probably scribbling notes furiously, his face a study in controlled desperation. And option B? Thorne finally managed, his voice tight. Option B, Agnes said, her voice dropping to a low, chilling tone, is the nuclear option. You refuse my terms. You attempt to fight this, to discredit the evidence, to drag my name through the mud. In that case, I will release everything, not just the Nightingale files, but every suppressed safety violation, every insider trading tip I've discreetly archived, every piece of evidence that shows how Sterling Corp has systematically defrauded its employees, its investors, and the public for years. I will personally deliver it to every major news outlet, every regulatory body, and every class action lawyer I can find. The fines will bankrupt you. The legal battles will tie you up for decades. Veronica Sterling will not only lose her company, but her freedom. Sterling Corp will cease to exist. This is not a threat, Mr. Thorne. It is a statistical probability based on the evidence I possess. Agnes let the words hang in the air, heavy and absolute. She could hear Veronica's ragged breaths on the line. The silence wasn't about deliberation anymore. It was about shock. Finally, Thorne spoke, his voice strained. Miss Periwinkle, this is unprecedented. We need time. You have precisely 24 hours to decide, Mr. Thorne, Agnes said, her tone final. I will be sending a formal proposal outlining the terms of Option A to your official corporate email within the hour. If I do not receive a confirmation of acceptance and immediate compliance within 24 hours, option B will be enacted. And rest assured, my process for archiving truth is far more efficient than your process for burying it. She hung up the phone, the click of the receiver sharp and decisive. She felt no remorse, no guilt, only a profound sense of quiet satisfaction. 22 years of being overlooked, of being the invisible engine that kept Sterling Corp running, had culminated in this moment. The hum of her refrigerator seemed louder now, a comforting sound of stability. The next day, exactly 23 hours and 58 minutes later, Agnes received a curt email. Subject: Acceptance of terms. Veronica Sterling had chosen option A. The fallout was swift and brutal, though mostly hidden from public view. Veronica Sterling resigned, citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue other interests. She issued a terse, unconvincing apology that was widely ridiculed. Thorne, looking haggard, announced the formation of the Sterling Corp Ethics and Transparency Task Force, with Agnes Periwinkle as its independent lead consultant. The financial settlement was substantial, enough to ensure Agnes would never have to breathe recycled office air again. Mr. Davies, the reporter, received a generous donation to his favorite journalism charity, with a note of thanks for his diligent investigative work. Sterling Corp survived, but it was a shadow of its former self. The stock slowly recovered, but the scandal hung over it like a perpetual cloud. The environmental fines were steep, the SEC investigations led to a complete restructuring of their board, and the strategic payments Agnes had alluded to were exposed, leading to the downfall of several mid-level executives and the public disgrace of a few local politicians. Veronica Sterling, stripped of her power and her reputation, was last seen buying a small, run-down vineyard in a remote part of Tuscany, presumably to spend her remaining days contemplating her mistakes amongst the grapes. Agnes, meanwhile, found her own narrow escape hatch. She didn't return to Sterling Corp. Instead, she used her newfound financial freedom to establish her own consulting firm, specializing in corporate record integrity and ethical compliance audits. Her clients weren't the corrupt executives. They were the whistleblowers, the overlooked employees, the quiet custodians of truth. She worked from home, her only soundtrack the gentle whir of her computer and the occasional chirping of birds outside her window. She'd proven that quiet competence, meticulous documentation, and a deep understanding of how systems truly work could be more powerful than all the buzzwords and corner offices in the world. Veronica Sterling had wanted her to handle a reporter. Agnes had handled it by handing Sterling Corp the keys to its own meticulously documented demise. And that, dear listeners, is how a quiet archivist, armed with nothing but patience and a perfectly preserved paper trail, brought down a corporate titan. It's a reminder that in the jungle of the corporate world, sometimes the deadliest predators aren't the loudest ones, but the ones who have been silently cataloging your every move. If watching hubris meet its match and forgotten truths rise like phoenixes from the ashes of corporate deceit ignites something in your soul, then consider hitting that subscribe button. It fuels us, and it keeps the coffee pot brewing stories of justice, one perfectly archived file at a time. So remember, no matter how small your role, no matter how invisible you feel, your documentation is your power. Your attention to detail is your leverage. And your truth, when preserved and unleashed, can be the most devastating weapon of all. Sterling Corp learned that the hard way. And Agnes Periwinkle, she just ordered a new, state-of-the-art backup server, just in case.